Hi, I'm Mike from Craft Supplies USA, and today we're going to show you how to break down a Vicmarc Chuck. My Chuck right now has gotten a little gummy after roughing out a few hundred wet bowls, and a lot of that moisture and stuff got in the jaw slides and kind of gummed things up so it doesn't operate as smoothly as I'd like. So we'll tear this down completely, show you how to tear your Chuck down as well, and diagnose some of the common issues that we see in Chucks and how to put it back together and how to clean it right. So let's get started. So the teardown and reassembly process is almost exclusive to the VM100 and the VM120. Other brands and manufacturers have different assembly and different components on the inside, so this video is specific to the VM120 and the VM100. So before we tear our Chuck down, there's a few things you're going to need. I would recommend getting a gallon of carb cleaner, or you can do the spray cans of carb cleaner because that'll help clean up all the components. We're going to need a wire brush, some multi-purpose synthetic grease, some metric Allen wrenches, a hammer, some expanding snap ring pliers, and then a punch for the safety pin. Okay, first thing we want to do is remove the jaws. I'll get my gloves on, and this uses a 4mm Allen wrench. And the reason I'm taking this Chuck apart is because I roughed out about 300 bowl blanks that were greenwood, and the jaws, I cut the tendons to all be the same size, so my jaws only open and closed roughly 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch. And by only opening and closing those that far for so many different bowls, it allowed a lot of debris to get into the jaw slides. And because it was wet, it just got in there and sticks inside the jaw slide areas and causes the Chuck to get really gummy and not operate smoothly. And one of the things that can happen is you can get rust on the inside of the slides, as well as if it gets stuck or bound up and you go to tighten and crank that down to try and force it through there, you can snap the teeth off the pinion gear. So the best thing to do is just take your Chuck apart, clean all the components, make sure all the jaw slides move freely independently, and then we can put our scroll ring and all the pinion gears back into place. So first thing we need to do is remove all the jaw screws. And the other thing too, as we remove these, all the small parts and screws we'll be putting in our carb cleaner. It has a small basket in there so I can put all the small pieces in there, let them soak, because a lot of times you'll get dust and debris in these screw threads, and sometimes it can cause the screws to get stuck and strip out the heads, and that's something we don't want to have happen. So I'll get all of our small parts and we'll put these in the carb cleaner in a little bit once the Chuck's disassembled. But right now let's just get all these screws out. So you can see like just the amount of debris we have on the screw itself. This Chuck's pretty dirty, and if I look down in here in the jaw slide, there's a lot of debris that's built up. And another thing too is when we get Chucks sent to us to do maintenance on, a lot of times they'll have overspray from finish on them, and a lot of times we'll just take the entire Chuck and soak it in the carb cleaner to get that finish off. So worth mentioning is the jaw slides are numbered. They match the corresponding jaw slides. So number 4 is here, and then counterclockwise it's 1, 2, 3 back to 4. So when you go to put these back on, just keep note of that. But if we now that we have the jaws off, you can look at the jaw slides and we have a bunch of debris on the face of the jaw slide. So we'll definitely want to clean the surfaces on the jaw itself as well as the jaw slide and get that to where those mating surfaces are nice and flat and they don't have debris that's causing your jaw slide to not sit flat. Now that we have these off, let's flip this over. Get our Allen wrench set out. I believe this is the 2mm Allen wrench. No, it's the 2.5. And there's 2 screws that hold the back plate on. And that's one of the nice things about the Vicmarc Chucks is that they have a closed back design, so it keeps a lot of the debris from getting into the pinion gears and the scroll ring. It helps you go a lot longer between maintenance schedules, as well as just keeps everything in there nice and tidy. So if we take that off, we'll want to clean this surface as well. Other than that, it looks pretty good. Now the next step is to take out the pins that keep the pinion gears in place. These are a threaded pin. On some of the older Chucks, they're a press-in type. They don't have an Allen wrench head. So depending on if you buy your Chuck 20 years ago, it might be slightly different, as well as the jaw slide orientation being clockwise or counterclockwise. So these are the pinion gear screws. You can see those are pretty dirty. and there's not much grease left on those. And because those are in contact with the pinion gear as it's opening and closing, we'll want to make sure these are nice and greased when we go to reassemble it. So we'll also clean these while we clean the rest of the small parts. Yeah, same thing, that one's looking pretty dirty. Now that those pinion gear pins are out, these should just pop out. And this is the pinion gear. So the other nice thing too is if you get your chuck from us or whatever, we do have extra parts, screws, pins, pinion gears, scroll rings. We have all these parts to fix these chucks, so if you ever have an issue, let us know and we can get your chuck sorted out. So those are the pinion gears. I do want to inspect the teeth on them. Sometimes if someone's been trying to crank through a bunch of debris in the jaw slides, or they have a burr on the jaw slide from jopping the chuck, it can cause some premature wear on the teeth. So the teeth look pretty good. They're not rounded over. There's no bent teeth at all. Looks pretty good. All right, now that we have the pinion gears out, we need to remove the scroll ring. And to take the scroll ring out, we need to take out this snap ring. This is probably the trickiest part of the process. So to take this out, we'll need our snap ring pliers. As I close these, it opens up the teeth, expanding this snap ring. This will come out, and then the entire scroll ring will just pop right out. All right, so that is the snap ring. We'll want to clean that off as well. But now we should be able to just flip this over, and that scroll ring is dropped down enough to let these jaw slides just come straight out. So we'll pull those out. Just use my punch to just kind of work this down the chuck body itself to try and get that scroll ring all the way. Okay, so there's our scroll ring. These teeth engage with the pinion gears, allowing this to spin and open and close your jaws. This thing's got a bunch of debris in here in these channels, so we'll put this in the carb cleaner and then wire brush this out and clean it off really well. So I'll set that off to the side, and then we can take our jaw slides out. So now that the scroll ring is out, there's nothing keeping these jaw slides in except for on jaw slide number 4, the safety retaining pin. That's going to keep that from coming out. But I do just want to play with the jaw slides for a second to make sure that they move freely. And it looks like this number 2 jaw is stuck. And I think that's where most of the pressure was coming from and not allowing that chuck to open and close smoothly. So just check your jaw slides, and if they move through the channel easily, those are the ones that are fine. You don't have to mess with other than cleaning them. And then it looks like this is the one that's stuck. So before I try to remove this stuck slide, I'm gonna get my punch and push the safety pin down flat, flush with the chuck body, so we can slide our number 4 slide out. So just line up your punch, and then we'll just push this nice and flat. It's getting a little bit stuck right here on the end. Yeah, there's a bunch of gunk that came out. You can see on the side of the jaw slide all that wood dust. It's kind of compacted up against the surface. All that stuff is inhibiting those from moving nice and smooth. So we want to clean all these surfaces off, and then this thing will move like butter. So, and look at all the debris down in that channel there. So this chuck is long overdue. We did a few hundred bowls on it, plus everything else I've been doing over the last few years on this chuck, and it's time to finally clean this thing. But you can see all the debris that's fallen out of the chuck body since we got it opened up. And then we also look at the inside surfaces of the chuck body. Down on the surface where the scroll ring slides, all that grease that was down in there has been mixed with a bunch of dust and debris, and it makes that really gummy so that scroll ring doesn't slide and operate freely. So we'll want to clean all this crap out, throw it in our carb cleaner, let it soak overnight probably. Then we'll go to our wire brush and just clean all this out and get this thing up and running, run like new. So let's flip this over, just wipe off my work surface, and now we can try and remove this number 3 slide. A lot of times too, it helps if this is in a vise with some soft jaws just to hold this in place while you're trying to move it. but hopefully it doesn't take too much force with the punch. Yeah, I can see just from hitting that out, all this stuff that fell off that jaw, just trying to get it out. So I think that's our main culprit with this thing running a little rough. Just all this sawdust and debris jammed up in there. One of the other big things we see a lot too is guys will be taking this on and off their lathe and they'll drop it and it'll put a big old burr or a dent in the jaw slide itself to where those jaws can't open and close. And then at that point you have to go and file those and smooth them over. So, all right, now that everything's out, let's get all of our small parts in the carb cleaner. And we'll let this soak for, a few hours depending on how bad it is, to overnight. So now that we have all our components disassembled, let's put them all in the carb cleaner. We'll let these soak overnight, and then we can come back with our wire brush, scrub everything down really good, and then we'll blow all the parts off with an air compressor to get rid of everything, and then we'll re-grease it, put it back together, and we should be set. So let's get this lid off here. And the one reason I do like the gallon jugs of carb cleaner is they have a small little parts basket. I can put all these small pieces in so they don't get lost in the bottom of the pail. So we'll just set all of our small pieces in there. And this stuff is pretty nasty, so make sure you're wearing gloves and then get the lid on or do it outside because there's a lot of fumes from this carb cleaner. And we'll put the jaws in there as well just to make sure these are all nice and clean. So we'll let those soak. That'll break down all the factory grease, hopefully break down all the grime and crap we have on there, and then we can get these cleaned off. So, oh, forgot our last chuck jaw. Go ahead and seal that up so we don't have a lot of fumes. We'll let this soak, and then once those are done, we'll get the chuck body and the cover plate and the scroll ring, and then we'll come back once everything's been degreased, and we can show you how to clean all the small parts and put it back together. Okay, so we've let the small parts soak. As they're soaking, I'm going to show you how to clean the body. If you didn't have a big jug, a gallon jug to soak the parts in, you can do the same thing with just the spray cans of carb cleaner or the brake cleaner. But essentially what we'll do is I've got a small little cookie sheet. That way I'm not going to get my work surface super dirty. Just something to contain the mess and all the little parts once we go to put this back together. So what I'll do is I'll get my brush and I'll dip that in the carb cleaner and then use that to just scrub the surface and all the nooks and crannies on the chuck. The carb cleaner is going to break down any finishes or any oil, debris, and dust that's on the chuck body and all the parts. And especially the old factory grease, we want to remove all of that, get a new layer of fresh grease to help this thing run another 30 years. That's the one nice thing about buying a high quality chuck is that it'll last you, more than your lifetime. Proper maintenance, your grandkids will be using this in 30 years or so. So buy quality and then maintain it well. The nice thing about the Vicmarcs is they do basically a chrome finish on the chuck body itself, so it helps prevents a lot of stuff from sticking to it. But I just want to make sure I get down in all the crevices with the wire brush and make sure we're getting all that debris out of those working and moving areas on the chuck. I'll use this angled part of the brush to get down into the insert and all the threads because you do get a lot of debris and crap built up in there. And I want to make sure that the threads are nice and clear. Scrub the outside of the body. This brush is a nylon brush. I would probably not use one of the bronze or the copper brushes because you can damage that chrome finish a little bit. And plus, the debris comes off super easy with the nylon. So get the face of your insert. A lot of times you'll get wax from those blanks built up on there, and then your chuck won't sit nice and square. So make sure that surface is clean, and then get down in there and clean the insert threads as well. And the nice thing too is the cleaner, the brushes, and the grease that you need. You can find those at any automotive parts store near you, and it's not that expensive. I think the gallon of that was like 30 or 40 bucks. The grease was 10 bucks, and the brush was a couple dollars. So it's interesting too. So you can't see from your angle, but if I get my rag and wipe down in there where I just brushed the inside of that insert, look at all the debris on the rag. That's all stuff that's interfering with your threads on your spindle and keeping everything from running nice and true. So you want to make sure you clean that really well. You can see all that gunk off there. All right, so now that we got this thing scrubbed out, you can see just all the debris on the inside of that chuck. Let's wipe out as much as we can, and then I'm gonna go to my air compressor and blow out all the threaded holes that we have for the cover plates and everything, get those nice and cleaned out, and then we can go onto the scroll ring. All right, you can see if you look at the rag, all that stuff was in there on all these contacting surfaces, binding things up, making the chuck not be as smooth as it should be. So that's all good stuff to get out. I'll take this to my air compressor and just blow out those holes, get the carb cleaner out of there, and then we can put our finish cleaning all of our small parts, and then we'll get this thing reassembled. All right, so I just blew the chuck out with the air compressor. So now the holes for the pinion gear pins are nice and clean, the cover plate's clean, and then if I look down inside the chuck body, everything is clean in there, as well as the underside of the jaw slide cutouts. So give your chuck a good look over, make sure there's no debris or anything left in there. Insert looks nice and clean, surface here is also nice and clean, so this is done. We can set that off to the side. This guy we can just wipe down. You usually don't get too much stuff on your cover plate. The worst case, you get a bunch of dust in these little cutouts here, but that's pretty clean. So now we can move on to the scroll ring. And I can see that there's a bunch of gunk down in here where the jaw slides slide through these. So I want to clean that out, and then I want to get rid of this old grease. So we'll take the lid off of our carb cleaner, and I'll just give this a little dunk in the carb cleaner. And then I can use that lid. So we'll cover that back up to try and keep the fumes down. And we'll just wire brush this really good. The other nice thing too about getting this thing really clean is then you can really inspect the surface and see where the wear is and what the issue is. It's a lot easier to diagnose a clean chuck than one that's covered in filth and grime. So get my rag, wipe my tray out, get that nice and clean, and then we can wipe off our scroll ring as well, or you can go to the compressor and just blow this thing off and get it nice and clean. Okay, the underside's looking really good. No more debris down in those channels, and there's no excessive wear or any burrs or anything on the surface, so that's really good. I'll go to the compressor to blow the bottom parts of the teeth out here, just get all the gunk out of there, and then we'll be right back. All right, so I just got back from the compressor. Now the scroll ring is nice and clean. You can inspect the teeth now and make sure none of those are rounded over or chipped off or anything. And then this surface here is nice and clean as well, so this is done. Now we can get all of our small parts out, just give them a quick scrub and a wipe down with the rag, and then we can reassemble our chuck. Just try and shake off as much of that excess carb cleaner as you can before you put it in your tray. And we can just dump all the screws, put our basket back in the jug, and close this up. So one of the cool things about the carb cleaner is it cuts through finish. So if you look at the outside of this jaw, if I scrape it with my fingernail, you can see that's all finish that was built up on the chuck surface. So it kind of breaks that down so then you can scrub it off nice and easy. It's typically overspray from a finish can, something like that. Or just a lot of the built up debris when you're roughing wet bowl blanks. You get a lot of that like sappy water on there. It just kind of sticks to everything, but you can see that stuff's coming off really well. So that chuck jaw looks nice and clean now, and that mating surface where it touches the jaw slide itself, that's nice and clean, and we won't have anything interfering those fit on the chuck jaw and the jaw slide. So I'll do the same cleaning procedure for the rest of the jaws. Alright, so all the jaws are nice and clean, surfaces are clean, the chamfer for the screws are clean, down in the corner there is all good to go. So I'm going to set my jaws over to the side, and we'll work on the pinion gears now. On the pinion gears, you really want to clean those teeth out, and then also this groove that goes all the way around, because our pinion gear pin rests in there, and those are contacting surfaces. So we want to make sure there's no debris in those. Make sure those are as clean as possible. Okay, so the pinion gears are nice and clean. Inspect those surfaces, make sure there's no issues. And now we can move on to our jaw slides. When you're cleaning these, you want to make sure to clean all the teeth, the channel and the slot here on this side, as well as the face where the jaw mounts into that channel. Make sure you clean all the surfaces on these really well. Alright, so this is the last jaw slide, just wiping it off, making sure to get everything clean. There is just a tiny bit of surface rust on the outside. If you really wanted to, you could get some steel wool, clean that off, but for me it's not really going to matter. So jaw slides are done, pinion gears are good, the jaws themselves are good. Now let's just clean the screws off. We'll wipe all these down and then set them off to the side. Okay, so the snap ring is the last piece to clean. I'll wipe my tray out so we don't get a bunch of contaminants in the clean parts. Now we can kind of set these out. So we've got all of our screws, pinion gears, jaws, jaw slides, our scroll ring, cover plate, and our chuck body. So the very next step, once all the parts are clean, is we're going to want to re-grease the scroll ring, the pinion gears, the pinion gear pins, and a little bit on the jaw slides. We'll use our multi-purpose synthetic grease. The grease really doesn't matter. You just want it to be a heavier weight grease, something with a little bit of tack to it. This stuff's just a little bit softer than chapstick, and it's got a little bit of tack to it. So you can see it string out when you spread it out like that. That's going to help it stay in place where you want it to be lubricating these moving and touching or contacting surfaces, especially down here on the inside of the chuck body. There's a lot of friction from the top of this scroll ring. Every time you open and close that, it's metal on metal, so we want to lubricate that surface pretty well. The jaw slides, I'll put just a tiny bit in this channel here and a little bit of a surface coating. I don't want to go too heavy because that's just going to attract more dust to the jaw slides, and when that's obviously what the problem was the first time, is we had a bunch of dust and stuff built up in the slide. So let's re-grease this and then we can reassemble it as we go. So the very first thing I want to do is I want to put kind of a heavier layer on the inside of the scrolls here. So I'll put a heavier coat on the inside of the scroll ring here and just spread that around. Set that off to the side, and then I'll put some grease on my finger and just lubricate the inside of the chuck body. And then I'll get a little bit of grease and just coat the inside of the holes for the pinion gears on both sides, and then we can drop our scroll ring into place. I'll get a little bit more grease here on the inside of the scroll ring, because this will be contacting and rotating around the chuck body. Alright, so now we can drop the scroll ring into the chuck body and just kind of get even pressure to press that down so it doesn't get crooked on this, or else it'll get jammed up. And then because the chuck's laying down on its face, we want these teeth to be facing up towards us. And then just move that back and forth and make sure everything's rotating okay. Now we'll grease our pinion gears. Make sure to get some grease down in that slot where the pinion gear pin rotates against the pinion gear. And then line up the hole with that post and slide that in. I'll put a little bit of grease on the teeth of the scroll ring. Now we can do the other pinion gear. Now that our pinion gears are nice and greased, we can put our snap ring in to maintain the scroll ring in place. So I'll just wipe my hands off, get the grease off for a second. And we can go back to our snap ring pliers to put our snap ring in place. So get those on there and just open that up to where you can drop this down. And once you're pretty close, you should be able to just press it in and then have it snap the rest of the way. And now the scroll ring is going to be retained. So now we can put our pinion gears in place. Just slide those in and make sure that post goes into the chuck body. Now we can put our pinion gear pins into place. So drop those down and then get our 2.5 millimeter Allen wrench. And then just get these just need to be finger tight. You don't have to crank them down. These screws are captured by the cover plate, so you don't have to torque these down really hard. Just snug, finger tight. I would say 10 inch-pounds, not foot-pounds, 10 inch-pounds would be the most I'd put on these, and that's all those need. So now that we have our pinion gears, scroll ring, and everything in place, let's flip this over. Okay, so now that we have these components in place, get your chuck key, and just make sure that everything spins freely. We want to make sure that the scroll ring's moving well, the pinion gears are engaging that well, everything's moving nice and smooth as it should before we put the slides on. So before we put our slides in, I want to grease the slides, put just a light surface coating and then a little bit down in that channel to help these move nice and easy. So just a little bit of surface grease on those, down in that channel, those contacting surfaces. That'll just help things move nice and easy. And then all the jaws are numbered, or all the jaw slides are numbered, so I'm going to lay these out 1, 2, 3, 4, because we have to put these back on in a specific order. If you just put all the jaws in there and start tightening them down, they're not going to line up correctly. So we need to get the correct orientation of our jaw slides in relation to the scroll ring. Alright, so to put the jaw slides back in and have them line up correctly, there is a specific orientation they have to go in as you advance the scroll ring to put each jaw slide in. So right now I have the number 4 slide, which has the pin in it, facing right here. Then it's counterclockwise, so this is number 1, this is number 2, this is number 3, and then obviously number 4 here. And I have to put jaw slide on 1 first. I'll advance the scroll ring, then I can put number 2 on, advance it a little further, we'll put number 3 on, advance it, and then we'll put number 4 on, and that should have those jaw slides line up correctly. Alright, so I want to set the start point of the scroll to the number 1 jaw slide, and if I rotate that I can see that's where the scroll ring starts. So I'll back that up to where I can put my number 1 slide in, and I'll push that all the way in until it bottoms out, and then I'll advance my scroll ring and it should start pulling the jaw slide in. And I'll rotate that until I see the beginning of the scroll ring on the number 2 slot. And then we can put our number 2 slide in, keep pressure on it until it's engaging, and we'll keep rotating that until we see that engage point here on the number 3. And then we can drop our number 3 slide in, and then the same thing on the number 4 slide. So rotate it until you see it, and then back it up just a little bit, and then we should be able to drop that number 4 slide in. If these are all in the correct position, as we advance this, the jaw slides will all move at the same rate, and then once it's finally closed, it'll be a nice perfect center, perfect circle in the middle. So you can tell when it's not the correct orientation because one jaw slide will be a lot further out than the rest or a lot further in, and it won't line up correctly. So if you don't do it right, you'll definitely be able to tell. But as I advance this forward, this looks like it's the right orientation. So you can see they're all the same distance apart from each other. So that's what we're looking for. I'll get my rag now. We can just wipe off all the excess grease on the body of the chuck. Okay, now that we have our jaw slides on, the next step is to get our small punch and punch our safety pin back out on the number 4 jaw to where it'll engage and act as a nice safety mechanism so you can't open those jaws all the way to where they fly out of the chuck body. So it only protrudes about 1/8 of an inch, and it doesn't take a lot of pressure to tap that down. So just get your pin, put it in the hole, do a couple taps, check your height. Looks like we need to go a little bit further. All right, so now you can see that safety pin is protruding and it's low enough that it won't contact the jaw right away. It'll allow it to do its full range of motion, but it'll act as that nice safety stop so these things don't come out of the chuck. So now that our safety pin's good to go, we have our pinion gear pins in place, the snap ring, our jaws slides are all in place. Now we can put our cover plate on the back. So just line those holes up, and then it's the smaller screw. And we can just tighten these down. Same thing, finger tight. You don't have to get crazy with these screws. A lot of times these chucks get sent back to us because the screw heads are stripped out from guys that have just torqued these things down, or they have a bunch of finish or debris that was in there for such a long period of time it kind of gummed them up and kind of locked them in place. So just finger tight, that's all they need to be. All right, now that our cover plate's on, we can flip the chuck body over and put our jaw slides back on. So this is the number 4 jaw. I've got my safety pin here, and just double check that surface, make sure it's nice and clean. And we can drop that into its slot. One thing with these chuck jaw screws, if you're changing out jaws a lot, like in our classroom where we're changing out jaws on a daily basis, we recommend putting some anti-seize on the threads for these chuck jaw screws. That way you're not stripping the heads out and having them get stuck. However, if you leave a set of jaws on your chuck and you hardly ever change them, you probably don't need to. But it's just one thing we do here in our class and workshop is just because we change the jaws out so much. But these I'll go a little bit tighter. And these screws, you're going to want to check the tension on these quite regularly. We've heard of people having the chuck jaws come off because their screws came out because they weren't maintaining their equipment. So anytime I take a piece out of the chuck, or if I'm turning a bunch of things over a weekend, I'll just throw a chuck key on there and just make sure everything's still nice and tight. And obviously make sure the jaw slide corresponds with the jaw number. Otherwise they're not going to be a perfect circle. First screw I put in just a little loose. Make sure the second one is running mostly seated, and then I tighten both down. If you tighten one of them down all the way, sometimes the hole doesn't line up and it can cause you to strip those screw threads out. So put your first screw in to where it's engaged but not fully seated, and then you can put your second screw in. Once I've got all of my chuck screws nice and tight, I just go back through and just double check everything, make sure everything's nice and snug. If you need replacement jaw screws, we have them available. These do tend to wear out if you're changing these all the time, so if you need extra screws or any parts, we've got them for you. But let's grab our chuck key, make sure everything turns nice and smooth, full range of motion. And then I like to open this all the way up to where I engage that safety pin and make sure it stops. Okay, I can feel it bottom out. I'll just do a visual inspection to make sure it's touching the jaw. Looks good to go. As I close this up, this thing's running a lot smoother now. It's not binding up anywhere. It doesn't take a lot of effort to open or close, and it's quieter too as I'm moving it. Fresh grease in there, no debris. These things run like a champ. So, all right, so I've got basically a brand new functioning chuck. Everything in there is running nice and smooth. So hopefully this video helped you guys out maintaining your equipment. If you have any questions when you start taking your chuck apart, give us a call, or you can leave a comment in the section below and we can answer you. As always, subscribe to our channel for more wood turning videos.